welcome back to the How to Podcast series. I have another great guest co-host on the show. I've been listening to this podcaster's show at work, and she's been keeping me company all through the night because I work nights. And it's great to have a person in your voice and then have them on the screen in front of you. It's a great connection. So if you ever have the chance to reach out and speak to the podcaster that you enjoy listening to, do it. It's such a great time. So Desiree, thank you so much for making time to be on the podcast. I'm glad to have you here.
I'm really excited to have this conversation with you.
This is fun, right?
It's fun.
Okay. All right. I've been listening to your show, but maybe some others haven't heard it yet. They will by the end of this podcast. Tell us about your show. When did it start? Who's it for?
Yeah, I struggled with that exact question, to be completely honest with you. I am a leadership development coach that spends a lot of time in the corporate world speaking with and developing teams. So that was one direction. The other direction I could go is I am a lover of personal development. I read anywhere from 60 to 100 books a year, mostly personal development and leadership. So I don't want to say a wealth of knowledge because that sounds slightly conceited, but I have a lot of quotes and concepts and just all of these things and people that I want to introduce others to, authors and books. And so I didn't know what to choose. Ultimately, I chose the title Lead with Confidence because it felt to me like it could be a little bit of both. It's not about leading in a leadership position with confidence. It's about leading your life with confidence, manifesting this belief that no matter what happens or what situation you end up in, you have the tools and the knowledge and the mindset to overcome any situation. And that's what I'm trying to create with this show. So it's been shifted and tweaked over the course of the 45 episodes, but ultimately it is for any person who is looking to become more in control of the life that they're currently leading.
And for those who haven't heard the show yet, is it solo hosted, interview based, a combination?
Yep. So I do 2 episodes a week. That is a new thing. I'm really excited about it. 2 episodes a week. Tuesdays is a personal development day, kind of just whatever topic happens to be top of mind. Thursday is a leadership development day. So something in the leadership corporate space. And you might get a solo episode from me on a topic. You might get an interview based conversation on the topic, but either way, that's kind of the topic for the day. And it depends. If I have a speaker, a friend, a podcaster, whatever it might be that I want to hear from and that I jive with, and I know the energy will be brought to the conversation, that's who's coming on my show, and it'll fit somewhere. I'll make it fit.
I like giving listeners some perspective on how we grow as podcasters. So when you look back to episode 1 to today, episode 45 and on, how are you different? Like, how are you grown?
I remember getting off of my first podcast episode with a guest. And I literally, that stupid jump around, like you're so excited. I remember doing that. And the funny thing is Jordan happened to be a podcast guest of mine. I had never met him before. It was the first time we hopped on a call. I had just posted in a podcast speaker group about needing guests, and he happened to be someone, and the conversation went well. He complimented me on my style, and I just remember being so elated by it. And I think you should be. I think you should celebrate those little successes, the big successes. But as I've come to grow into these episodes, it's, again, who are the guests that I like to listen to? What are topics that I think people want to hear? So the evolution of it has really been just focusing in on the content that brings me joy and gets me excited and makes me want to re-listen to my own episodes. Because if that's not the case, then the avatar, which is me, essentially, you best speak to the person that you once were or are currently trying to become, then it wouldn't apply. So that's where the evolution has come in, of just making sure that I'm speaking to the person that I ultimately want to work with.
I guess the one thing for me is I actually had a response from a listener, and it was really interesting because they said, Dave, don't take this the wrong way. And I'm like, oh, here we go. What does this mean? They said, I listened to your show because of you. I don't even really, doesn't matter what you talk about. You could talk about anything. You read me the cereal box. I would listen to your show. There's something about you as a host that I just find comforting, and you're part of my week now, and you're in my head. Like there's just something about you and your voice. And for somebody who's historically struggled with the sound of my own voice, as we all tend to do at times, that was the weirdest feeling to get that message, because now I'm thinking more carefully about how I do my show and how I present myself Am I reading from a script and it's very canned and very, very scripted and very, word. I like just talking to people and imagining them here with me when I do my solo episodes. Do you have any little tricks that you do if you do like a solo episode or you want to address your community? How do you record? Are you like using your hands and talking like this and doing all this stuff, or you just like,
yeah,
take me behind the mic?
I have never been diagnosed with ADHD, but I'm pretty certain that I have it. I have got every type of, I've got thinking putty, I've got magnetic beads, I've got kinetic sand, like you name it, I've got the fidget toy because I can't sit still. I talk with my hands a lot. It's part of I'm a disc consultant. I'm a high ID on the disc scale. And so I'm very like talking with my hands, very big in that sense. So that's one of the things that I've done to kind of bring me back to center, keep me focused on the mic, keep me focused on the message, is having something to do with my hands. As long as you can't hear it. Obviously, if I'm sitting here playing with magnets, you're going to hear it. So I find something that's not going to make too much noise. But the other thing, and I heard this and I can't unhear it, is if you tell someone that you have 5 tips or tricks, have 5 tips or tricks. I tend to like go off on a tangent and then don't come back to what I was originally talking about. So I've become very diligent in making sure that even if it sounds like I went off chasing a squirrel, like ultimately I come back to that initial message, make sure I finish out my thoughts. And it's the same thing with guests as I don't read from a script. I actually just have them fill out like 4 questions, one of which is their bio. And then I pick and choose topics I want to talk about from that. Because as a podcast guest, I find that a lot of the questions are getting repeated. I feel like I'm telling the same story over and over. But there's these certain podcast experts, I would say, because they kind of know how to go about it, is that they don't ask the typical questions. They have a conversation with someone who's maybe been on 100 podcasts, and I'm sitting there like, I've never answered that question before. I've never thought about it that way before. And that to me is what makes a really interesting podcast episode, is not to think, what do the people want to hear? You want to know what your audience wants to hear, but what do you as the podcast guest want to hear? Podcast host.
Yeah. That goes back to research, right? That goes back to knowing your guest. I had Adam Nimoy on my show. His dad is Leonard Nimoy from Star Trek, right? Spock. And Adam's been on Big Bang Theory, which I love, that show. He was on there. His dad was on Big Bang Theory. And every interview I heard, people interviewing Adam about his new book about his dad, was all about Star Trek and his dad and very little about Adam himself. And so I'm like, okay, I see where everybody's going in this. I'm curious. I love Star Trek. I had all the things when I was a kid too. But so I'm kind of nerding out on that side of it. But nobody talks to Adam about Adam. And I'm like, well, I'm going to lean more into the Adam side of this story than his dad and Star Trek. I got it out of the way at the beginning because I was fanning. But I'm like, let's talk about him. And I noticed on his Instagram that he had a picture of his dad playing the guitar, and Adam's like a little boy beside him. Adam plays the guitar, and his son plays in Offspring, the band. So music is 3 generations in his family. So I said to Adam in the interview, why is music such an incredible thread throughout your family? Talk about that. And he sat up straight, because now we're not talking about Star Trek. We're not talking about his book. We're talking about Adam. And he just like, the smile of satisfaction on his face to talk about something different than all of the other people that interview him. In that moment, I was just such a cool moment. It was so nice to see him react that way. And when we were all done, finished, he's like, who are you? Like, that was great. I'm never talking about that stuff. Right. Yeah. So that's what I like to do, is I like to try to get behind the scenes of my guests a little bit and ask them those questions that make them kind of go, wow. Like this week I had a gentleman on, wrote a book about his son who was a micro preemie when he was born. So he was in the NICU for 105 days. And the baby was born at 26 weeks-ish, around there, about the size of your hand and the weight of 3 or 4 bananas. That's how much the baby weighed. Just this tiny little human, right? And so I said to him, now his son's now 7, so everything's great. I said, one day your son, Grayson's going to listen to this episode in the future. What do you want to say to Grayson? If I just leave for a few minutes and give you the mic, what do you want to say to your son? And the look on his face was just like, oh, Dave. He just like, what are you doing to me?
It's mean.
He's like, okay, right? And so he talked to Grayson, dad to son, and shared his message to his son, right? Like, what a great little thing to do with your guest. That's not the typical, where were you born? Where'd you go to school? What was your first job? Okay, we can do that all day long, but let's go somewhere different with our guests.
Yeah.
Do you try to pull that out with your guests as well? Something that unique and different?
I always feel successful when I'm interviewing a guest if they say, gosh, that's a great question. Because you've stumped them in a way that they don't have a canned answer for it. And so every time I can get a podcast guest to say that, I'm like, okay, we're heading in the right direction. We're getting off the beaten path of things that they've spoken about before, and maybe even helping them to become a little more self-aware, which is the whole purpose of my podcast.
Mm-hmm. How did you learn how to podcast?
That is a great question. I don't feel like I did.
Okay, good.
The funny thing is I am a very loud, take the stage. I consider myself to be aggressively friendly. I like to be in the spotlight. Like, I'm not, it just is what it is. But I've had to learn to become very discerning and asking people how they are and asking questions and sitting back and like actively listening because I can't sit still. So I feel like part of my special place with podcasting is that I've been practicing how to ask people how they are and to get to know them and to get them to open up and be vulnerable. I've been doing that my whole life. And so it's kind of come into this place where now I get to do it and I get to share those conversations with others. And I'm someone who, if you ask me how I am and I answer you, I sometimes forget to ask you back how you are. And so it's created this platform and this opportunity for me. In my solo episodes, it can be me. I can talk, I can share my wisdom and knowledge, but in the guest episodes, I get to just create that platform and that space for them to kind of shine.
I think as I grow as a podcaster, I listen back to my early days and I would do this one thing to my guests, and I'll show you an example, okay? You ready? I'm going to do it to you as if it was my episode 1 or 2. So I'm going to ask you a question, and I'm going to show you what I used to do. Okay, you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Hey, Desiree, great to have you on the podcast. Can you tell me, like, what's your favorite movie?
Because I said so.
Okay. Tell me more about that movie. Why do you like that movie?
It has one of my favorite actresses in it. Actually, a couple of them, Diane Keaton and Mandy Moore. And
wait. I know about Diane Keaton. She's been in other movies too, right?
Yeah, that's
What
right.
other movies has she been in? Right? Yeah, that's really great. Can you tell me more about Diane Keaton then?
Yeah, I love the movie Mad Money that she's in too. She makes some money.
Oh, I make money where I work at my job. That's interesting. I like that. Okay, keep going. Like, so we're talking about money now. Like, money's really important to you then?
Yeah, and I'm having a hard time keeping a straight face here, David.
See, what I would do, and here I'll stop doing it. Please, Dave, stop. Is I would ask a question. My guest would be mid-answer, and then I would redirect them in a new location, new direction. And my audience is like, Dave, you asked Desiree a question, and you didn't let her finish the answer. I don't know what the answer was, right? You would give 2 points of 3, and I'd redirect you after point 2. You never came back to point 3. And my listeners are like, Dave, you realize that we're listening to this, and we don't know what point number 3 was, back to what you mentioned before. So I would get caught up in the conversation and be, oh, I want to talk about that. And I would chase and get my guest off track. And we both don't even know where we were anymore because we've wandered off the path so far away that we lost track. So I stopped doing that because my audience are like, Dave, can you just be quiet and let your guest talk? And I'm like, I can do that. Okay, sure, I can do that. So, and the bonus is my wife loves it because now, after 30 plus years of marriage, she's like, I love your podcasting because you're quiet when I talk. This is a good thing. You're learning good things, Dave. So more podcasting. So
that's hilarious. Yeah, I struggle with that. I've been in like a Bible study before where the person leading it will ask a question. You give 1 second, no one answers because they're formulating an answer, and then they answer it themselves and move on to the next question. And I'm like, yeah, like I had a thought here. So that has helped me too, is just seeing situations like that where I didn't appreciate the way things were handled, being able to kind of, again, create this platform for myself to then handle the situation in a way that I want to. So it's selfish a little bit in those ways, but it wouldn't be fun otherwise if you weren't creating it for yourself and people that are listening. They're not going to listen if they don't like the way you run it. So might as well be authentic to you so it can be fun for both.
Yeah. what I tell podcasters that help through the How to Podcast series is when you're talking, think of it as like a musical thing that's happening. I've been a musician for 45 years. And what I've found is that the beauty in music is found between the notes, not the notes. So it's the space between. So when you're listening to your favorite song and they do this really, they're going and going, all of a sudden they do this big break. And then they're back in again. That break makes you go, what? Like, what's going on, right? And it's that space. So music is not always about the noise. It's about the silence in between. So when you're podcasting and you ask your guest a really thought-provoking question and they say, wow, that's an amazing question, right? And you just leave that space in because they're looking for the answer. And as a listener, I just kind of sit forward a little bit going, what's going to happen next?
You lean in.
Right?
Yep.
And I find with all the amazing tools that are out there right now, they truncate all the silence and take it all out. So you get this really quick question, answer, we're done. And I'm like, I like leaving in those breaks because it makes people lean in a little bit more to a conversation than feeling so perfect, so edited, no silence, no gaps. That's kind of my default. I kind of leave them in. I don't do it excessively, but when there's somebody really thinking about their next answer, I really want to give them space.
Yeah. I don't edit my podcasts other than adding an intro and an outro. If there's or likes or stuttering or gaps or we say something stupid, I'm like, I could take that out, but I'm not going to. It just makes it more fun, authentic. It makes you feel like you're actually sitting in on a conversation that's happening. Plus, I don't have time to sit there and take out all the ums. I wouldn't publish a podcast episode ever if I had to try and do that.
Take that same podcaster that highly edits their show. They want perfection in every episode and then put them up on stage in front of a microphone in a crowd. There's no edits in a live setting. You're going to get up and ah your way all the way through that. People are going to be like, wow, that's right, very different on stage than a podcast. Wow.
Well, and there's no do-overs. You can't hit pause and start over again. It just is what it is. So,
right.
And I am a keynote speaker too. So that, I guess, when you ask the question of what do you do to get better at your podcast, I wrote a book. So I go and I speak on that topic as well as the corporate facilitation. So that's helped a lot. And vice versa. The podcasting has helped me to really hone in my speaking skills of not using the words and filler words like that.
So advice for new podcasters to continue podcasting or to start? Had you had this 45 episodes ago, what kind of things would you want to hear on a podcast about podcasting that would make it easier for you?
It was funny because I was in Arizona a couple weeks ago for a retreat and there was a business coach there. I said, I'm really feeling drawn to doing 2 episodes a week. I just feel like there's more there I want to say. There's more guests that I want to have. I said, I don't know if I have the capacity. I don't know. And I'm sitting here questioning myself and questioning whether the thoughts in my head are the ones that should be there. And he said, stop it. He's like, follow your heart, follow the excitement. The podcast episodes are going to sound exciting if you're excited about them. He said, in 2 months when summer's over and you need to take a break, go back down to 1. It is, you can flow through it. It doesn't have to be perfect. Not only the editing of it, but the production of it. And David, you might have a different opinion, but if I attempted to be perfect, I would have quit because I am a very all or nothing individual. So this gives me the perfect opportunity to kind of go all in on the content, go all in on the guests without having to go all in on the perfection of trying to make it something that it will never be.
Yeah, I get that. Because I agree with you totally. Like, I have 3 episodes a week for this show. And then I have 7 other podcasts because why not, right? So there's a lot of podcasting going out. But I found for me, the reason why I'm so into podcasting is I get to travel the world with a microphone. It is like the most insane thing. I'm going to talk to probably 10 or 11 people today. This is my first meeting today with you. But after this, I got another 10 to go. I'm going to travel all over the world. Yesterday, I was in Tasmania. I've never been in Tasmania. But I'm talking to these great people. I interviewed an 11-year-old author in Australia yesterday. Like, how would I ever have a chance to talk to this guy, right? It's so amazing. And it's just the power of a podcast.
Yeah.
I don't know if everyone needs to have a podcast because that might be a little bit too much, but anyone that's creative or has a speaking thing they do or a book or content. I just love the idea of having a podcast, getting to meet people that inspire you and be curious for a while and let your audience see your curiosity displayed as you bring on somebody you admire and just have a conversation with them. It's so cool. And again, nobody would ever take my call if I just emailed them or called them up and said, hey, can I have 10 minutes of your time or an hour of your time? They're like, who are you? Why are you calling me? Right? But have a podcast. They're like, sure. Yeah, I'd love to come and chat with you. That's the selfish joy of a podcast, is being able to have these great interactions with people.
Yeah. The other day, earlier this morning, I was speaking to someone in Barcelona. And then the other day, my favorite TV show, MasterChef, I got to speak to the winner of season 2. Like, what is this life? What? It's so much fun. And I absolutely love it. And it started slow and it's slowly continuing to grow. And I think sometimes we see people on the outside of ourselves that look like they have everything together. It looks like they just have the most success in the world, but they have been on the same journey we have. They're maybe just further along in it. So they've gone through these same things. Like, if that's ultimately the place you want to be, you can get there, but you have to put in the reps. You have to do the hard work. And I'm only 40 episodes in. I do not have 7 podcasts. I have 1. I'm 40 episodes in, and I have learned so much. And my speaking has become so much more eloquent and put together, while at the same time becoming more authentic and transparent and vulnerable. So you just have to put in those reps. If you're kind of feeling as a listener that it's just hard, it is hard. If it weren't hard, everyone would be doing it. And like David said, that would just be way too much noise. So put in the reps. It's okay if you're not perfect. Maybe there aren't the number of people listening right now as there will be in a year. So now is the time to put in those reps and to practice and to feel like you're gaining confidence with every step.
What are you doing to grow your community?
That's a great question. I am not great at marketing. It's the one thing that I'm not fantastic at. But because I have paired this podcast with speaking, with my book, with corporate workshops, with keynotes, every time I connect with someone, I'm telling them about my podcast. Every time someone comes to me with a concern, I have a conversation with them, and then I say, episode 40 of the podcast was how to ask for help and why you haven't done it yet. That's a really great episode you should go and listen to. Like, I'm always attempting to bring it back to that, not because I'm trying to self-promote, even though you are trying to self-promote ultimately, but because I do truly feel like the content that is on my podcast is worth listening to and that it can help people and inspire people. I have people who are reading my book right now that say, I'm reading it in your voice because I listened to your podcast. Like, how cool is that? That someone can read words on a page and be hearing it in my voice, never having met me before. I just think that's the coolest thing. I
was working with a person recently on their podcast. They came to me and said, Dave, I want to grow my podcast. I'm like, okay. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, grow it how? They're like, I want to grow my audience. Okay. I'm like, how do you mean? They're like, what do you mean? How do I mean? I want to get more listeners. I'm like, okay, well, one second. There's 2 different things there. Growing your audience can mean 2 different things. It can mean getting more listeners. Yes, I agree. We all want more listeners. That's why we're doing this, right? It's kind of the idea. But what about growing the listeners you have? Mm-hmm. Like, have you spent any time growing them? Are you looking over the heads of the listeners, wishing more people were here? Or are you looking at the people in front of you that are here? Why don't you grow them? And instead of them listening to episode 45 and never coming back to the other 44 episodes of your show, how can we get those listeners to come back and listen to more of the episodes you've done? Because all 45 of them are awesome. I'm listening. I can attest to that. So how can we get our listeners to listen to more? Maybe binge our entire catalog of everything we've ever done. That's what I would encourage you to do. Don't be looking over the heads of your listeners, going, oh, I wish there were more people here. I'd be more happy if I had this number. You'll never be happy with that number because you're going to want the next number.
Exactly.
So stop that. Focus on the people that are there, listening to your show, and how can you build them up? You have your speak pipe now. You have ways for people to reach out to you. What are you doing to grow the people who are in the room before you start worrying about the people who are not in the room?
Yeah.
Right? So that's kind of my focus in my show, and what I try to help people do is you have 4 episodes and you have 3 listeners. Have you failed? No. Have you talked to those 3 people yet? No. Well, maybe you should. Maybe there's find a way to get a hold of them. And people are like, I don't even know how to do that. You're just a stat on my stats. I'm like, okay, well, here's an example. I have my podcast editing and support show where I teach people how to be podcast editors and how to find an editor or be one, right? And I saw on my stats that I had a new listener in Germany for the last 5 of my episodes. New city, new location. I'm like, So at the beginning of my episode, I'm like, hey, everybody, welcome to the Podcast Editing and Support Show. Glad to have you here. I have a new listener in city name, Germany. Just wanted to let you know I see you. Yeah, I see you in my stats. Thank you for listening to the last 5 episodes. I'd love to hear your voice. But thanks for listening to the show. There's only one person in Germany listening to my show. Then I went on and did my episode. At the end of the episode, I'm like, and again, as we leave, to shout out to the person listening in Germany. I see you. I see you there. I would love to hear your voice. Leave me a message on my website, on my SpeakPipe. A few weeks later, Desiree, an email comes in, SpeakPipe, new message. Now, I have 8 shows, so I don't know which show this is coming from. I have no idea. I press play, and I hear, hi, Dave. My name is Simit Patel. I live in Germany. I am your listener in Germany. This is so weird, right? So I got to talk to Simit through my SpeakPipe.
Yeah.
And here we go. Like, call them out. If you don't know who they are, call them out. Tell them you see them. I see you in Chicago. I see you in Ohio. I see you in Toronto, Canada. I would love to hear your voice. Go over to my SpeakPipe so I can meet you. I want to know who you are.
Yeah.
It's such a cool feeling when they do that.
That's so cool. I have been just amazed. And this is something else I guess I would share with the listeners too, is the people that you assume are going to be there to support you 100% and listening to your show, they may not be the people. I have 3 sisters and a dad and cousins, and not a single one of them listen to my show. But an individual I met 6 months ago who does something similar to what I do reached out to me the other day and said, the leadership coach that you had, oh my gosh, when you're like horses, equestrian, the equestrian that you had on your show. It's like, that episode was amazing. And I was like, not only is this person that I would have never expected to be listening, but they're reaching out, they're supporting, they're building that connection between the two of us. And I just think that's the coolest thing in the world, is that you just don't know who's listening. So if you are attempting to only get new people, or only trying to get the people who you think should be listening, maybe it's not for them. Like, I don't know. There's something to be said about that. Just talking to the listeners that you already have. I love that.
And early on in my podcast too, I challenged myself with this question: how many listeners would I show up for? What's my minimum number that I would show up for week to week? Right? What's my number? What, like 100, 200, 1,000? What's my minimum number?
Yeah.
Minimum, bare basic. I have to hit this number or I'm done. Do you have a kind of bare minimum number for you that you would show up for your podcast?
Can I share a concept with you before I answer that?
I love it. Go.
Okay. So in my book, I talk about this concept of the energy that you're showing up with. And the quote around it is, the experience that you have can only rise to the level of energy that you bring to it. So I used to be a group fitness instructor, and some days I would walk in the room and there would be 30 people there and the room would be full. There's no extra space. The energy is obviously heightened, right? Because there's a lot of people there. There's a lot of excitement. Some days I would walk into the room and there'd be one person there, and they would inevitably say, you can just, you don't have to teach me today. It's just me. I'll go on the treadmill. And I would say, no, I'm not teaching to you. We're going to work out together. And I would turn towards the mirror and we'd work out together. My energy level could have very easily shifted based on the number of the people in the room. And I never let it, because your experiences can only rise to the level of energy that you bring to them. I would do this podcast for one listener because that is the energy that I want to bring. No matter what. It doesn't matter how many people are in the room. I'm going to come with the same level of energy.
Home run. That's my number too. Is one. One is my number. I would show up for one person. And for me, my inspiration for that number, and the reason I do that, is based on I did a little mini series on my show around a quote around an apple seed. And I don't know if you've ever heard this quote before. It's not my quote, so I can't take credit. But basically, you can count the number of seeds in an apple, but you can't count the number of apples in one seed. Right? There's unlimited potential for new apples in one seed. So when you do an episode for one person, they learn something new. They get a new insight. They get a new frame of reference, a new frame of mind. They go home and treat their partner better, their kids better, they go for that job promotion. They do something, life changes for them because they learn something through your podcast, that one person. And now their life changes multiple lives attached to that person. Isn't that worth it? Like, none of those other people heard that episode, but one person did. And one person's life is different. Is that not worth it? Do you have to have 100,000 downloads? Sure, I'd love to have 100,000 downloads. That means I'm impacting more people. Great. But again, what's your minimum? And I love that you turned around, worked side by side with that person in that moment, because I feel like that some people think a low number is failure. And they're like, I'm so embarrassed that there's only one person here for the workout. I'm so sorry for wasting your time. Let's come get back together when there's more people here. Mm-hmm. No, that person showed up, right? They made a decision to come to the gym that day. So, right, the fact that you did that probably meant more to them than you'll ever know.
Mm-hmm. Well, and right? It's not just about me. It's not just about them. It's about the people that walked by that window and saw that and were encouraged by it. Like you said, you can never tell how many people you're adding value to in that one moment. Maybe that class would have been canceled if I would have continued to not teach on those days that only one person showed up. But the fact that I stayed and taught, it maybe affected the ability to continue having those class for when people did start coming. You like you said, you never know of the value that can be had with one experience, especially if you're bringing that same level of energy to it that you would if it were what was quote unquote successful in your mind.
You know, I like to flip this on its side as well and go the other way as well. When you have great success in life, don't forget the one person. Mm-hmm. Right? Do the opposite. So if your podcast takes off and you get billions of listeners and all that stuff, success finds you. Don't forget the one person. For me, that's the Taylor Swift 22 hat. When she does the song 22 on her tour, mm-hmm. right? One person gets to stand at the edge of the stage, and she dances and sings all the way down the stage to them, takes off her hat, puts it on that kid or whoever's there, and they have one-on-one time with Taylor Swift right in the middle of the song. They walk away with a moment where they had interaction with their idol mm-hmm. on stage. And it's all about that one person. At the same time, there's thousands of people in the stadium, and everybody wants to be that one person in that moment. Everyone wants to be the one with the hat. But she takes time even when she's surrounded by all of the people and fame and numbers of adoring fans, she picks one person and puts our whole attention on them. So as podcasters, we need to also do the same. So as your podcast grows and you go from 1, 2, and 3 listens to 100,000 and on, don't forget, there's one new listener walking through the door every episode. They've never been here before. They don't know you. They don't know anybody in the room. But the moment you take off that hat and identify them and acknowledge them, like Taylor does in her concerts, like what a moment. Mm-hmm. Like, I think we need more of that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting. I love that you were able to flip that same message and like you did with the guy in Germany. That's huge. Yeah. He felt seen. I guarantee it. Yeah. So cool.
And you don't get that on radio. You don't get that really on YouTube to the same extent. Social media, it's kind of a noisy place. Mm-hmm. Podcasts, we have people listening to us in their ears and participating in the conversation, and they feel like they're here in the room with us. So I love acknowledging them and putting my hat on them in the moment, really, and saying, I see you, and you're welcome here, and we want you to be here.
Yeah, I love that.
It's good. Now, one thing I set up before we hit record was I do a question of the month every month with my guests and my listeners, and they're so gracious. They respond, and it's fun to hear all these great voices in podcasting. And I pose a question out to the audience and the community, asking people to leave a message on my SpeakPipe on my website, howtopodcast.ca, and you just basically answer the question of the month, but also promote your show so people will come and listen to you. That's the whole idea. The question of the month is really just a thinly veiled excuse to have you promote your show, really, to be quite honest. But I love hearing your responses as well. So what I do is when I have great people like you on, Desiree, I love to bring your comments into that episode I do at the end of the month. So we're going to set it up. So I'm going to ask you to, again, pretend like we're just starting. But hey, welcome, introduce yourself, tell us about your show, and then answer the question of the month, which is, do you listen to your own show? Yes or no? Why or why not? Okay? So introduce yourself, your show. Do you listen to your own podcast? Yes or no? Why or why not? You ready?
I'm
Let me put you
ready.
on the spot, podcaster.
I'm ready.
You ready? Okay, and 3, and 2, and 1.
I'm Desiree Petrich. I am the host of the Lead with Confidence podcast. Yes, I listen to my own show, and it's not because I'm listening to make things better necessarily. It's not because I want to criticize. It's because I truly enjoy listening to the conversation that I'm able to have with other people. Sometimes when you're in the middle of the conversation, you don't get to get the value out of it that you hope you could. So if you get to go back and listen to it, you might learn something from yourself that didn't click in the moment you were saying it, that you can then take into the rest of your day, the rest of your week, until you anxiously await the next podcast episode from your own show that's going to drop so you can listen again.
Beautiful. Well done. Well
Thank
spoken.
you.
I love it. So that's going to make its way into the end of the month. As we wrap up, Desiree, thank you so much for doing this, by the way. Again, as an active listener of your podcast, I feel honored to have you here with me. And again, you're going to keep me company as I finish off and catch up to episode 45. I'm working my way through. I'm like in the 20s, maybe the late 20s right now. I'm working my way up there. So I'll be finishing off your podcast this week and ready to, I follow. So I'm going to get all the new episodes. But thank you for your show. I really love what you do. I love how you host. I feel like you're talking to me when you're doing your show. So well done. I'm really enjoying it. I do get to listen to a lot of podcasts. Some I'm like, wow, this person could really use some time with Desiree just to kind of learn how to do it. I'm not putting shade on them, but just you're doing it really well. And I really enjoy it as a listener. So thank you for what you do.
Thank you.
The one thing I just wondered from you, as you move forward with your podcast, do you kind of have a plan of where you're going to be going next with the show? Do you have something that's interesting you in the future? I just kind of get curious about how people plan out into the future for their podcast.
The shift into 2 a week and personal versus professional development is very new for me. It's something that I'm really excited about. I almost quit my podcast at about 25 episodes because I just wasn't enjoying the process of it. The editing of it was getting overwhelming and it just wasn't exciting. And then I think it was because I was trying to be too discerning with which episodes I was posting. And so when I doubled it, which seems so counterintuitive, when I doubled it and all of a sudden had all this extra space to bring on more guests, I got more excited. The editing 2 podcast episodes didn't feel as daunting because I was all of a sudden getting to talk about what I wanted to and with who I wanted to and cover the topics that I felt were, trending maybe in the sense that I knew people in my life were going through things and I could speak to that. So that is what's new for me. That's what I'm really excited about right now, is not trying to do things perfectly, but just continue to grow other people, the listeners, in the way that they want to be hearing the episode. So I'm really excited about it. I don't know what the future looks like, but I love the process and I love getting to create it and to connect with people that I would have never met otherwise, both as guests and as listeners. So I absolutely love it.
You've mentioned your book a couple times in our conversation. Can you tell us more about the book too, and how we can find it?
So my book is called Taking Intentional Action, How to Choose the Life You Lead. It is a story of how I was 275 pounds in junior high. My son spent a month in the NICU after being born during a blizzard and almost didn't live. 2 months after my son got home, my mom passed away from a second stroke. I managed a dementia facility through COVID. We've been talking a long time, David. All of a sudden, my mind isn't working anymore. So all of these little stories of resilience, I only made it through because of this foundation of self that I had built for myself. It's self-engagement, self-worth, and self-awareness. And so I go through that framework, all of the stories that affected my life in some way, shape, or form, and how I still continue to take control to be able to create this life that I absolutely love. So that is what the book is on. Hopefully you can read it in my voice after listening to a couple of podcast episodes, but I would read my book. And I think that is the highest compliment I can give myself, is that I enjoyed the process of living it, of writing it, and now of reading it.
And you're coming on Living the Next Chapter to talk more about the book, which I'm excited. We'll tie these 2 episodes together so people get a little more Desiree in their lives. And then on top of that, we have the podcast as well. So as we close off, remind us about the podcast, where to go. Maybe where should we start listening? Episode 1, episode 45, where should we start?
So it's called the Lead with Confidence podcast. Actually, it's Lead with Confidence is the podcast. You can find it on Spotify, Apple, anywhere you get your podcasts. I used to struggle with this because I'm a completist. I would start at episode 1, and if someone had 600 episodes, I would be bound and determined to get through all 600. But then I wouldn't be listening to anyone else's voices. So I've started listening at the most current episode of podcasts that I find, just to kind of get a feel for the individual, make sure I really like what they have to say, the way that they speak, the guests they have on. And then I kind of start maybe a little bit, not quite all the way back at episode 1. I've only have 45 episodes. It won't take you that long. I'd love if you'd listen to all of them, but ultimately I'd love for you to check out the most recent, because I just think that gives you such a really good understanding of who the person is, who they're becoming. Because if you go back then and listen to episode 1, it's like, look how far they've come. So that's my advice on my podcast or any podcast.
Excellent. And for you listening, as you go and listen to Desiree's podcast, I would encourage you to listen to them all because they're amazing, first of all. I would also encourage you to rate and review, not because of what it does for Desiree, but because you, as a human being, as a listener, are a nice person. That's the reason why I would ask you to do that. So please do that. Show some kindness for someone who's putting out great content into the world and has a book. She's a speaker. She does it all. And she's a great person on top of that. So Desiree, I would love to have you come back in the future on the How to Podcast series, give us updates, share more about your journey. Okay, so we just need a few more good people in the world, and you fit the bill. So thank you so much for being on my show.
I love it. Thank you so much, David. I'm so excited to continue working with you too.
Hey, thanks for being here at the end of the podcast. This is just for you because you're still here. Thank you for your support for the podcast. Thank you for listening to the show, sharing it with other podcasters. Maybe somebody you know is thinking about starting a show. I would love for you to say, hey, wait. You should go check out the How to Podcast series. It's got everything you need. And Dave as well is included. You get one free Dave with the How to Podcast series. I'm included with it. So kind of a bundle thing you get. To that point, mentioning it in the podcast, definitely want to remind you here at the end, there's a link in the show notes. Starting it this summer, I'm working through this. It's a way for us, you and I, to have a conversation around podcasting. I want to help you. And I've been doing this for people who listen to the show now for almost 3 years. And I just haven't been promoting it as a thing. So I'm now promoting it as a thing. I want to spend time with you. I kind of would love to hear your voice. We're going to jump on Zoom together. We're going to talk about your podcast. You get time one-on-one with me, 30 minutes in my calendar, completely free, no strings attached. You don't have to buy a blender or a vacuum or none of that stuff. No. Just us. I just like to help you. And whether you're thinking about starting a show or you have a show, you want to grow your show, whatever it is, I'd love to meet you, talk about your struggles, your questions, work together. And I am eventually developing this into more of a coaching program for podcasters. But I'm starting with my best friends first, for free. So if you're interested, you listen to the show, and I appreciate you. Link in the show notes. Let's get together and talk podcasting, okay? You and me. Let's talk. Let's talk soon. See you. Thanks.